From the kitchen of the cabin and around the world, this is Voices from the Solitude, a podcast about the coronavirus and gaming. Today, I'm talking to Kathleen Mercury. We talk about teaching remotely and how to stay grounded. So, I'm here, virtually from across the world, with Kathleen Mercury. And firstly, so explain to me what's happening with you. So you've absconded to your lake house in the middle of nowhere, is that right?
That's absolutely right. You know, it's so funny because you are one of the people that I thought of when all of this just started happening. And I just like, my gosh, he's a prophet. He was right. So I live in St. Louis, Missouri, which is pretty much smack dab in the middle of the country. And for many people, they probably think it's the middle of nowhere anywhere. But my family has a lake house, and I'm about 3 hours west of where I live. It's a pretty area. It's hilly. There's a giant man-made lake here, and my family has a lake house. So since I have Wi-Fi and excellent access to resources, I decided to come here.
And so, you know, do you have a garden there? Are you able to get some fresh air, or are you basically hunkered down indoors?
Our house is right on the lake. And so we have a giant deck. We have a dock down on the water itself. So it's really, really a lovely setup. As far as that goes. If I was home, I have a house in the city with a relatively small garden. Here, you know, it's much more wide open. And in addition, because this is the off season, there's very few people down here as well. There's someone in the house 3 houses to my left, and then there's somebody 2 houses to my right. Across the street, I think there's a couple people that are here, and all the rest of the houses are basically unoccupied right now. So very, 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 very much social distancing here.
And so what's the situation in St. Louis? Is there a lockdown? Are most shops shut, or is life sort of relatively, are people going about their business, or is everyone sort of hunkered down?
Well, the city has, the major cities in St. Louis have issued stay-at-home orders. Not quite lockdown where it's essential businesses only. There's a lot of people I think are still able to go to work. But there's a lot of social distancing happening, especially at the stores and stuff. I'm concerned it's not enough, quite honestly, especially when you get into more rural areas where I don't know that, you know, there are people that even understand that something is really happening here, or they don't believe something is happening here, which is a whole other situation. So, so one of the reasons why I'm not at home is one of my roommates is still going to work, and he has a minimal contact job at a warehouse, shipping out board games, actually. So maybe some would consider that to be essential, but I wasn't comfortable being there with him coming and going so much, so I decided to come down here.
And sort of, what's the feeling amongst you and your friends? Is everyone worried? Is everyone taking it in their stride?
I think it varies day by day, and honestly, it can be, you know, time of day versus others. You know, there are times I feel safe and secure, and then there's other times where, you know, I worry. Like, for example, I have to go out later, and I'm doing some pickups of some groceries and some other supplies, and, you know, while it's like contactless, you know, in my car, you know, still I have to leave and I have to go and be out in the world. And so it depends, I think, day by day, minute by minute. One of the big things for me is I'm a teacher. And so we had 1 week of spring break, and before we left on spring break, they prepped us that we may not come back for a couple weeks. But wasn't really sure. Now we know we will definitely be out for a full month from when they originally stated, but I don't anticipate that we'll be going back. Our last day of school, I believe, was to be May 20th. And I really don't anticipate that we will be going back at all until the fall.
And so how are you, we'll come on to the school and sort of how you're dealing with that in a second, but sort of how, you're a very gregarious, very outgoing person. How is this sort of how is this affecting you in your mood? I hate using the buzzword, but I think it's applicable here. Mental health. Are you suffering from sort of the effects of solitude, or are you taking it in your stride?
Well, I am definitely an extrovert, and the first couple days down here were really hard. And I'm even like laughing at myself, and I sort of was then too, because how in the world, when I am so safe and taken care of, and my salary is guaranteed, I'm in a beautiful place, my bills are being paid, I do not have a lot of the stress and problems that a lot of people are having right now. And I'm incredibly empathic towards that. So when the first couple days down here by myself, when I was having such a hard time, I just, it was hard. It was hard. And I knew I was being ridiculous about it. And I just spent a lot of time trying to put myself in the right frame of mind. And I will also say, as far as mental health goes, in planning on coming down here while I was still, in the preparation days, my anxiety, which I don't have a problem with normally, my anxiety was to a point where it's unmanageable. And I felt that if I didn't get help, I might be putting myself in more danger, at least as far as being able to cope and to get through it. So I contacted my doctor, and they put me on anxiety medication. I was put on some high blood pressure medication. I have some emergency Xanax, which luckily I haven't had to take yet. But I most assuredly took steps to protect my mental health while I was down here, for sure. But the one thing, so there's a couple things that sort of helped me as far as mental health goes. One, there's the one astronaut, and I forget his name, but he did a short little YouTube video on dealing with isolation in space. And, if you're on the International Space Station, all it does is one big explosion, and you could be, that could be it. I mean, space travels, it will never not be experimental, I think. So, but he talked about, one, what are the risks? And, there's like all the imaginary risks when your mind just starts unspooling, but what are the real risks? And what are the constraints that you have in that situation? And coming to terms and sort of framing that. The other things that helped me, that he said, was talking about like, what's your mission? Like, what's your goal? And like coming up with a plan, and what are your objectives for the day? But the other thing too is, we have this time that we may never have again to really focus on ourselves and creative endeavors, other types of pursuits. And so what are the things that you can do for yourself now that you would love to do normally, but you just don't have the time for? My sister is cleaning her house within an inch of its life, but it's the kind of thing that she never gets a chance to do. And she's so happy that her house is so clean. People could be writing books, learning to code, learning languages and all that. And so trying to take what is a very difficult situation and frame it in a way that's helpful. And the other thing too that has sort of helped me with this is, this is difficult, this is unprecedented, but people have survived wars, and wars have the same uncertainty as far as when this will be over. And, they've had to deal with scarcities. They've had to deal with, threats to their safety and their security. I mean, you could get, you could get bombed, there's so many different things. And in America, we haven't really had to deal with a war on our soil since, the 1860s, really. So for many of us here, we're not used to that. And I think that sort of putting that framework in mind as far as this is what we have to do until this war is over. Well, people have been through far, far worse, and so just trying to keep myself in a frame of mind like I am okay, I am safe, I'm doing everything I can to keep myself safe. And at the end of the day, there's things that are going to be out of my control, and just trying to manage that and keep myself at a good place. But there is one very positive thing that's come from all of this, is how much people are connecting with each other over the internet. How many different friends I've Skyped with, played games with, connected with. my students. I've had game nights with them. I've done other gaming things with them, like on the weekends and at night. And there are people who I never ever see except for like at game conventions or, a few times a year that I am talking with and I am playing games with and doing so much more with than I ever would have before. And that's really been a gift with all of this.
So coming on to your students then, so you're a teacher and, you obviously can't go into schools. I assume the schools are shut. How are you teaching the kids, and sort of how do you feel that the kids not only are coping, sort of dealing with the issue themselves, but also how is their learning been impaired, and what are you trying to do to keep it as good as it possibly can be?
Yeah, it's interesting because I normally teach game design. And so when I teach game design, students at this point, normally in my process, have made a game that they have play tested, like right before we shut down for spring break. They had done their first round of play testing. From there, they were to get look at the games, all the ideas, and then we were going to basically repeat that process, that iteration, as far as getting feedback, play testing, designing, making changes, play testing, getting feedback, making changes. And I usually like to do 3 or 4 cycles. Well, I can't do that because I use game design as a way to have my students develop communication skills, empathy, collaboration, problem-solving skills, critical thinking skills, productive skills. And that human piece is missing when they can't sit at the same table across the table. I know there's ways you can do it with Tabletop Simulator. There's all kinds of other ways. But the thing that I have to be really mindful of is the demands and pressures on these kids when they're at home and there's so many factors outside of my control. When I have them for 45 minutes a day, I can have them do all kinds of different things. When they're at home and they've got, they all have their own computers, but you don't know about, like the load on their Wi-Fi, what their family requirements are, if they have to take care of any siblings, if they understand the work that I'm asking them to do. There's so many factors outside of our control. So one of the things for us is our school is right now, we're grading work. I'm giving feedback to kids, but their grades as they aren't being calculated. And so technically, if a student doesn't do anything, then other than like emailing their parents, we can't, that's probably about it. My sister, who's also a teacher in Germany, they are much different. But it's also a very affluent private school. And basically the kids are, this is the work you're expected to do. Here's your, you will be graded. This does count for right now, because we're still operating under that first sort of, we didn't know how long this was going to be. We were thinking maybe a couple weeks, that there was going to be no new learning. It was just going to be like reinforcing, skills that we've already learned. Now, as we're looking at going through the end of the year, there will have to be new learning. There will have to be, so grades may become more of an issue with that. So the long and short is I can't do what I was doing before. And it's way more important to me that I take care of my students from an emotional, affective place, not just an intellectual place. My students can read any book, they can do the math, there's lots of things, like school tends to be very successful for them. I'm much more concerned about their well-being, and I want to use games in a way that allows them to connect with each other, to connect with their families, that still give them creative problems to solve, but also are just different based on the situation that they're in. So for this first project that they're doing, I found something online. It's called the Board Game Remix Kit. It's an amazing resource because what it is it's a series of rule changes, from very simple kind of how you play the game rules to more substantial changes to complete mashups, but basically taking basic games that kids have at home, like Monopoly, Stratego, all those sorts of games, and giving you lots of different variations on ways to play. And so I'm having my students use that as a model to take games from their homes and to make changes with them too, because not every kid has, kids do not have the games that I have in my classroom. So I have to work with what they have. And even if they don't have any games at home, I gave them a copy of here's what a Chutes and Ladders board looks like. Now all you need is one die and, 4 things you can use as pawns, and you can make Chutes and Ladders. So then how do they reimagine? How do they rework Chutes and Ladders or whatever game? And so the other thing is I had a Skype session with them and to talk about the project and what we were going to do. And I said something about how there's something that for them to work on at home with their families. And the kid asked if they can work with each other. And I said, well, do you want to? Because I've been sort of trying to minimize, maybe in some ways, how much they were on their computers. And the kids were like desperate to socialize with each other, to connect with each other. And I was like, cool, you know what? Because normally at the most I let kids work with one partner. Nope. You can work in groups up to 4, and you can work with kids in any of my classes. And, so I've been much more willing to let them figure this out in a way that is enjoyable for them, because I want them to do it. I want them to engage with it. I want them to embrace the challenge. And if they're able to do so because this gives them a reason to be Skyping with, 4 friends or 3 friends, and they put all this together, then that to me is probably way more important than what the end result will be. But I think the end result will be better because if they're all like happy and excited to have this as a reason to do it, then I'm hoping that the work will be good. And hopefully too, when this is done, I'll be able to post what the kids have done too. So hopefully they come up with some fun ideas. The other thing too is but I also am but I don't necessarily want to just give them like game design challenge, just like board game, because I think that will on their own get hard, get repetitive. And so trying to figure out ways to mix it up and trying to think about what are the things that would help them now in this situation. So the second project that we're going to do is using the vast array of online resources that have been springing up as a result of all this, and especially that of virtual tours. So my next challenge for them that I'm currently still working on the draft of this is having them use virtual tours to create quests for each other, kind of like digital scavenger hunts, puzzle hunts, where basically they will use these online tours to create quests for their classmates to go on. Sort of like there was a Harry Potter escape room that I'd seen this link to it, and that was basically the inspiration for it as well. And so having them create experiences for each other. And because one of the things too is, having them, again, focused on, what would be fun for their classmates and all that. But the other thing too is by using these virtual tours, like a reminder that the world is still out there, a reminder that, all these amazing places still exist. They will continue to exist. And you can feel like you're still in the world a little bit, even if you're in your own home, because I think that's important to them right now because they feel very isolated, very alone. They're scared. And I think having a little bit of look outside, birds are chirping, it's going to be messy, but it's going to be okay. And trying to, use the work that I'm doing with them in a way to help them remember some of those things.
And so what do you think will be the kind of ramifications for you as a teacher? How will this improve your teaching maybe? And what do you think will be the ramification for the kids when this blows over?
Well, I think that this is such an amazing opportunity to really look at what education is and how I teach and what I do. Now, when I said how I normally have them take a game and iterate 4 different times through the process, I was already planning on changing that up anyway, because a good friend of mine, John Brieger, is a game developer, and he studied design when he was in college, and I've always loved talking with him about his classes and the process that he took, and it was so interesting. But he had a professor, he told me once, that had 2 classes of design students. And in one, they did 2 projects and spent a lot of time on them. And then in the other, they did a lot of projects. And at the end, he looked at the quality overall. And the quality for the class that did a lot more different types of projects was better than the ones who did 2 things and just spent a lot of time on them. So I'd already started thinking that I was going to give my students more game design challenges in my game design class to give them different skill sets to prevent burnout, prevent them from being stuck in an idea that they were just tired of. And so I was already thinking before I was going to have them make a roll and write game after spring break, a totally different type of game than what they had done, which was a fairy tale based kind of just basic introductory, kind of game. And so I think that in looking at how can we leverage distance, remote learning, whatever we're calling it, in a way to really connect students to each other, to the world, to really think about what is most important as far as how we learn. How can we really use technology in a way that's meaningful, that isn't just, create, a word, if you're using something in Google Docs, it's, you might as well write it on paper unless you're doing it in a way that makes sense. So I think this actually could be really, really transformative. And I know certainly for me, I was already thinking about making changes. So, and I'm a pretty flexible, I never do things the same way type of person, type of teacher anyway. But this definitely has really pushed me because I care about my students first and foremost. I teach kids first and then I teach content. And so since the situation that my students are in has changed, I need to change to fit them and where they're at. And I'm really excited about what I could be doing now that connects more with kids personally than I probably have ever done before. And I hope that in education that others are taking the same approach too, that we're not just using this sort of distant remote learning connectedness as a way to just make everything digitally turned in. I hope the work is transformed by what we do, because the other thing too is, we're supposed to give them probably for their core, like they're supposed to have somewhere between 2 and 3 hours of work a day and not the 7 hours that they normally spend in school. So if we're looking at doing less, how can we make sure that that less is meaningful? How can we make sure that they're actually learning from it as opposed to just processing something? And I hope that others are really taking this, this challenge of this and doing something that is transformative for themselves and for their students.
So just to finish then, if in your experience being on your own, being an extrovert who is forced sort of out of the society of other people, what one tip would you give people to sort of cope with what's going on?
Be kind to yourself. I think that it's really hard when we don't, the boundaries that I personally, I like knowing where boundaries are so I can push them as much as possible. And all of a sudden I was living in a very different set of boundaries in every way possible in terms of where I was living, apart from my family and friends, apart from my job, every boundary changed. And so, in order for me to come up with the boundaries that I am comfortable with, that's been a process. And I've also just in trying to be kind to myself, there's been little things that I really find I enjoy. And this is a weird one, but this is a big house. There's a big deck. There's multiple decks. There's the dock. There's all this. But one of my favorite places now is I took this padded bench and I put it in front of the sliding glass door in the bedroom where I'm sleeping. And my neighbor, a few docks down, likes to go down on his dock and play music. And it could be anything from pop to country to whatever. And one of my favorite things is just to sit on that padded bench inside the house. I could be outside. I could be all over the place. But just to sit inside on that bench and, listening to music, just being reminded that someone else is out there, that they're, even if I can't see him, I know someone is out there. Someone else is playing that music. And the thing that's really weird too is, because especially for so much footage of people over in Europe when they go out on their balconies and they applaud and, they do exercise out on their balconies for people, in Italy and all these other places, it helps me to feel a sense of solidarity in a weird way that I don't know that they're asking for, but just kind of being there, like I'm on my balcony too. And in a weird way, I feel connected that I'm doing what I can in this situation where other people are too. And I don't know if that makes sense. I don't know if that's right, but all I know is I like sitting on that bench. The weather's nice when there's a breeze. And I could be out on the deck. I could walk down to the guy's dock and hang out 10 feet from him. You know what I mean? But just, yeah, I really like sitting on that bench and just breathing and feeling the sun. And yeah.
Brilliant. Well, Kathleen Mercury, thank you very much for your time.
Ben, I'm so glad that, again, this has allowed us to reach out and connect.
Indeed.
Because I was really bummed that my trip to Berlin this summer got canceled as a result of this, because I was hoping we would be able to hang out again. But maybe next summer.
Indeed.
Yes.
If you want to support content like this, you can go to patreon.com/5G4D. Thank you for listening. Stay safe, and if you can, stay at home.